Howdy! Welcome back to Cryptic Creatures, the show where I give you the inside scoop on the details of a specific creature from folklore, mythology, cryptozoology, or literature. I'm your host, local monster nerd, and alleged serial arsonist, Moth Mancha. First of all, I'd like to apologize that this episode took so long to produce. I got really busy, and if you can't tell, I have moved. So, new set, if you can call this a set, like there's a bookshelf now, I guess that's cool. There's like an alien and a moth up there. That's something, right? I'm not going to stick on that though. I would love to jump right into the next case. I'm actually very excited about this episode. We're very frequently going to be swinging back towards Greek mythology in this series, but I'm going to try to not do two in a row out of, not boring you all with just Greek monsters, just to keep things interesting. So today, we're going to talk about a creature that, ever since I was a kid, has been my absolute favorite mythological monster, the Chimera. Now, I don't know what it is about the Chimera, but I've always found it to be really, really fascinating. Back in my earliest days of doing art and drawing fake Pokemon in middle school, my very first fire starters I ever drew were inspired by the Chimera and the Manticore, which is another mythological lion monster we'll cover in a later episode. It's at this point in the script that I'd like to extend a very merry you to Yahoo Mail. Because I went to my old childhood email address to look for the art that my friend did for me of this Chimera design. Yahoo Mail being Yahoo Mail, they had deleted every single one of my emails, leaving absolutely no record of this art that I was looking for at all. Now, my profile picture was still this Chimera in a stroke of luck. So, I've got like a maybe 100 by 100 pixel version of this old art that I still look fondly on because my friend did it for me, and that was really nice. Now, before I get into the etymology segment, just in case you're not familiar, let's briefly describe the Chimera. You've probably heard of some sort of Chimera before, whether it's the mythological creature, or the actual animal Chimera, or the catch-all term. The mythological creature, very specifically, is a fire-breathing monster, a lion with a goat's head coming out of its back and a serpent's tail. That's it. We'll talk more about the specifics of this later, but that'll be better suited for when we actually delve into the myth. The Chimera, unsurprisingly, is pretty often changed in various ways when adaptations of its myth show up, maybe more than any other creature. So now let's jump into the etymology proper. Chimera, of course, is another Latinization, this time of the word chimera, because there's always a minor spelling difference between the two languages. The word itself has other potential meanings, though. Chimera and chimeros respectively mean she-goat and he-goat, which tracks, of course, with one of the Chimera's heads being the goat. More interestingly, however, is how chima means winter season, which comes all the way from a Proto-Indo-European root. I'm actually gonna save my breakdown of this for a little later, believe it or not, so just hold in your mind that the Chimera's name is related to winter, and let's move on. Another important thing we need to talk about when we talk about this creature's name, though, is the spelling. When I initially planned this episode out, I had spelled it with an extra A in the middle, Chimaera. But if you look at the title and anywhere else I refer to it in this video, I've cut the initial A and I'm spelling it Chimera. You can take me hot today. Let's break that down. So, okay, medieval Latin spells it ERA, classical Latin spells it AERA. Spelling it with the extra A technically isn't incorrect, let's be completely clear about that. But I wanted to draw a better distinction between the classical chimera of Greek mythology and the real animal, the chimera, which is a kind of ghost shark, which is spelled with the A. They're pretty cool. They have their own weird and wild creatures entry as well in the actual animals that they do. So if you go to Google and you search up chimera with ERA, you'll find mostly results revolving around the fictional monster. But comparatively, if you search AERA, you will find mostly results for the fish. AERA, again, is not incorrect for this monster. I am just being neurotic about being consistent. So the chimera, as previously mentioned, has the body of a lion and the head of a lion. It also has, in its earliest appearance, a second goat head coming out of its side and or back, as well as a serpent's tail, just like Cerberus in the first episode. What fascinates me about this design, though, is that every single depiction of the chimera that I've pretty much ever seen has a mane. And this is notable because every time they mention the chimera, they mention it being a female monster, and if you know anything about animals, male lions are the ones that have the manes. Both Homer and Hesiod use she-her pronouns in the Iliad and the Theogony respectively, which, of course, are usually some of the main sources for this myth. As far as I can tell from the research I've done, this is due to a trend in art at the time to actually depict all lionesses with manes. To draw a distinction between the two, these manes would be shorter and, more importantly, lions would have their ears hidden and lionesses would have their ears showing. If we can take a look at some of the early art of the chimera, such as this 4th century Kylix, we can see that it not only has traits commonly shown with lionesses at the time, but actually also the udders of a goat as well, which is really cool. Another piece of 4th century art, and my personal favorite, is the Chimera of Arezzo, which depicts the chimera similarly, but in 3 dimensions. Again, it has a sparse mane and visible ears, very clearly implying a lioness. Now, more modern art and media of the chimera, of course, gives the creature a thick, full mane. If you look at the art I got commissioned for this episode even, I decided to use a slightly more modernized version of the design because, let's be honest, it's a lot cooler with a full mane. The chimera is still a she-goat though, so do what you will with that information. We love a fire-breathing queen. As I mentioned, the chimera is almost unilaterally described as breathing fire, and yeah, you can kill a lion, that's well within the realm of possibility, but if you're part lion, part flamethrower, that's a lot more of a threat, and the chimera is part lion, part 3 flamethrowers. I am going to break protocol, however, and talk about the pop culture section a little early, just a bit of it. And this is because as we get more and more depictions of the chimera, we start to get more and more variations on what kind of creature it looks like. First and foremost, in some of the original tales, notably the ones by Hesiod and Pseudo-Apollodorus, the snake tail is actually technically a draken. Dragon with a K, which is more of a serpentine dragon than just a plain old snake. This, of course, has led to the chimera being depicted as some sort of a draconic creature in a lot of media, and I can't blame you. Dragons are f***ing awesome. And the chimera being a fire-breathing creature, of course, definitely influenced this shift, because dragons are also very notable fire-breathing creatures. Another thing you may notice is that a lot of modern chimeras have dragon wings, so that means unless you can breathe underwater or go into space safely, there's pretty much nowhere on the planet you're safe from this creature, unless the sea has some kind of lionfish, sea serpent, Capricorn hybrid. Some versions of the chimera actually do swap some of the body parts around. The Dungeons & Dragons chimera, which is CR6, has dragon wings and a draconic tail, like literally the kind of tail a dragon would have, and replacing the original serpent's tail is a 3rd dragon's head also sticking out of its back, like the goat head. And this is a cool concept as well. It keeps the general 3-headed vibe, and it has all of the parts that we're looking for, but they then make the dragon the only head that can spit fire, and I'm gonna level with you, I think that's a little cheap. It's a lot cooler when it's the lion because that's less expected. Or the goat, let's be perfectly honest. And again, if you're familiar with this creature, you'll know a lot of interpretations like the dragon head. Yeah, it's pretty cool. I'd like some dragon head. I'd like a dragon head myself, you know? Breathe fire on people and stuff. Anyways, the waters get even muddier from there. Wrath of the Titans Chimera has 2 heads that breathe fire in tandem, but only kind of represent a lion and kind of a goat. In God of War 3, they do some Zaphod Beeblebrock shit and hide the lion head under the goat head on the creature's stomach. And the Final Fantasy games have a ton of different depictions. Chimeras are usually some sort of strong overworld monster in these games, and we have Final Fantasy V's depiction, which has the dragon head and the snake head. And then in Final Fantasy VIII, we have this wheel of heads, and then in Final Fantasy X, we have whatever this is. And then there's Full Metal Alchemist, where they decided to get really bold and make a chimera that was half dog, half human girl. Alright, it's time to rip the band-aid off and talk a little bit about the other kind of chimera a lot of you are probably familiar with. Instead of being like some sort of weird living natural creature, we have alchemical chimeras, which are lab-made amalgamations of different pieces and parts. Ultimately, chimera has come to mean just a mix of different pieces and parts, given that the mythological chimera is technically just a mix of different pieces and parts. Despite this not being the mythological chimera, I can't not talk about it because these are very explicitly inspired by the Greek creature. Typically, alchemical chimeras are an example of science taken to the extreme, science gone wrong. I'm certainly not familiar with a series that goes, yeah, chimeras are super cool and not f***ed up and unethical in any way, shape, or form. I could be wrong here, but that's definitely the vibe I pick up. Full Metal Alchemist, like I mentioned earlier, actually has two kinds of chimeras. It has the normal ones that you would expect, which are combinations of different beasts, like this Greek-inspired one, as well as horrible animal-human mixes done through terrible alchemy. The chimera I joked about earlier, if you're not familiar, is Nina Tucker, the source of a lot of collective anime trauma. Her dad, this asshole, alchemically combines her and their pet dog together in a notoriously heart-wrenching scene. Other, less sad human chimeras also exist in this series, and they use their powers for primarily evil. At some point, it's honestly hard to determine where the concept of the chimera ends and when you just have two animals that are mixed together. Mythology doesn't help this either. We have the griffin, the sphinx, the hippocampus, the periton, the manticore, and many other monsters that are just two animals smashed together in a blender. The Avatar series, the good one with the airbending, features almost exclusively these animal hybrids, and the distinction I've decided to kind of draw here is, are they called chimeras in universe or not? We'll delve into this further later in the expanded pop culture segment at the end, but a good rule of thumb is that these animal hybrids that are called chimeras are almost always intentionally made. That's not to say that all man-made hybrids are chimeras as well, because sometimes they're mutants, like in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Crash Bandicoot, or like in Avatar, they're just a weird, natural fauna. This, of course, is where the non-proper adjective chimeric comes into play. Any creature that is a mix of parts is definitely chimeric, regardless of whether it's a chimera or not. Again, I'll have further examples of both kinds in the pop culture segment, but I've put off talking about the mythology for way too long. The chimera supposedly was born to two other mythological entities I mentioned in the first episode, Typhon and Echidna, also the parents of Cerberus. As I said before, we'll touch on them at some point, but just a reminder that Typhon and Echidna are well known for being the prolific parents to a large number of these monsters. A lot of these monsters are also chimeric in nature. Cerberus, the hydra, and Typhon himself all are serpentine in some nature, and the Nemean lion and the sphinx are all leonids, which means that the chimera is the perfect mix of these traits with a little goat thrown in as a treat. Interestingly enough, from my understanding, the chimera is also the single monster that is most consistently stated to be the offspring of Typhon and Echidna. Every author of mythology cites a slightly different list of children, and the chimera is the only one to show up 4 separate times with Hesiod, Apollodorus, Homer, and Hyginus. Circling back around to the Sphinx and the Nemean lion, though, we have a weird situation that left me a little confused originally. Many sources that summarize all of this information on the internet state that the Sphinx and the Nemean lion are stated to be the offspring of the chimera and her brother Orthrus, because it's Greek mythology, of course they are. The issue, however, is when I went to check the sources on this claim that the chimera sired the Sphinx and the Nemean lion, which are sometimes also attributed to Typhon and Echidna. I was sent to Hesiod's Theology, which is awesome. I've already used that source a bunch. It's great. In fact, I had already read this section because the chimera is mentioned just after Cerberus and the Hydra. But when I went to the Perseus Digital Library translation, which is the one I'd been using up to this point, and I checked the cited line of the poem, "She was the mother of chimera who breathed raging fire, a creature fearful, great, swift-footed and strong, who had 3 heads.
one of a grim-eyed lion, another of a goat, and another of a snake, a fierce dragon. In her forepart she was a lion, in her hinder part a dragon, and in her middle a goat, breathing forth a fearful blast of blazing fire. Her did Pegasus and noble Bellerophon slay, but Echidna was subject in love to Orthus, and brought forth the deadly Sphinx which destroyed the Cadmeans, and the Nemean lion, which Hera, the good wife of Zeus, brought up and made to haunt the hills of Nemea, a plague to man.
Did you catch that? Despite being told that the theogony is the source for the chimera siring the Sphinx and the Nemean lion, what we just read clearly said that it was the offspring of Echidna and Orthus, which is even weirder of a relationship. Orthus, at the very least, is consistently cited as the father. However, I did some further digging and found a different translation of the theogony that reads differently.
And every exhalation was a breath of pure flame. Pegasus did her in, and noble Bellerophon. She was the mother of Sphinx, the deadly destroyer of Cadmus' descendants after mating with Orthus, and of the Nemean lion, that Zeus's dutiful wife Hera raised, to roam and ravage Nemea's hills.
The footnote at "she was the mother of Sphinx" cites that she is probably the chimera, but it could be Echidna. This actually belays a lot of my fears that a bunch of websites are straight up wrong, because translating is not an easy task, especially when it comes to poetry. It's very easy to come to very different conclusions based on the way you decide to focus on a translation. Focusing on meter, meaning, or a blend of both can yield wildly different translations. I'm just happy I found a translation that supports the information I found. The lesson to take from this is, first of all, use multiple sources, and secondly, just because a source is cited doesn't make a source inherently right. Always do some extra research if you're not sure. That means from now on, I'm going to be making sure I'm citing the specific translations I am using of a source, provided a translator is provided. I had to dig to find M.L. West's name because the first copy I found of the text didn't credit him at all. It took like half an hour. I checked some other translations too in regards to the mother of the Sphinx. Christopher Kelk directly says Echidna. Richard Caldwell and Stanley Lombardo just say she and don't elaborate on it, which is likely a source of a lot of this confusion. I personally would read she to mean the chimera, as the paragraph above it is about the chimera. Caldwell does add a footnote that also says it's ambiguous, however, so ultimately I'll leave that up to you to decide. Do you think the chimera sired two other lion monsters, or were they all part of the same terrible brood? Originally, this genealogy section was just going to be part of the mythology section, but I'm never upset about finding a new rabbit hole to dive into. Surprise tangents are very quickly my favorite. So now, finally, we can maybe actually look into the myth. Amusingly, this section's gonna be pretty short because there's only one major story to talk about, believe it or not. In a stunning turn of events, every person who wrote about the chimera told a pretty consistent myth, that of Bellerophon versus the chimera. Bellerophontes, or Bellerophon, was a demigod son of Poseidon. His mother was Queen Eurynome of Corinth, so his stepdad was King Glaucus, and he is known primarily for his association with two mythological creatures, the chimera and Pegasus. If you're not familiar with Pegasus, Pegasus is a white immortal winged stallion, and also a son of Poseidon. Of Poseidon and Medusa, actually. Poseidon was probably a horse at the time. Pegasus, by the way, is a proper name. It became popularized, of course, as just a winged horse in general, but like Cerberus, in mythology, there's only just the one. This, by the way, means that Bellerophon, as a youth, had captured his half-brother. Did he know? I hope not. At some point, though, Bellerophon is exiled for killing a man and sent to King Proteus to be purified. Bellerophon is later sent even further away to Lycia after the queen accused him of trying to violate her, which he didn't, by the way. She came on to him and he denied her, so she lied. Lycia, by the way, is far off the mainland from Greece across the Aegean Sea, so Bellerophon had traveled quite a bit out. King Iobates of Lycia was instructed in a letter to put Bellerophon to death, but he doesn't want to, at least not directly. So instead, Bellerophon is tasked with defeating the creature who had been terrorizing the land of Lycia, the Chimera. King Iobates figures that the Chimera will just kill Bellerophon, and if not, well, then the creature that had been burning everything down would die. So the two sons of Poseidon, Bellerophon and Pegasus, quest off to kill the beast. This is where the main difference in the story comes. Sometimes Bellerophon already has Pegasus, and sometimes Bellerophon captures the steed after being tasked with killing the Chimera. Bellerophon having Pegasus help him is notable, however, because, again, the original Chimera cannot fly. So part of what lets Bellerophon successfully slay the beast is the fact that he's able to fly over it and shoot arrows at it. What finally kills the Chimera, however, is his lead-tipped spear, which he thrusts into one of the Chimera's mouths, and the heat from her fiery breath melts the lead, chokes the Chimera, and kills it. So apparently its lungs are connected to only one of the heads? Interesting. Now, the Chimera can potentially represent a number of things. At the beginning of the episode, I mentioned that Chima means winter season. The Chimera being associated with winter is less an association of cold and more of an association with destruction. The winter is often, especially at this time, seen as a time of destruction. The Chimera, which roamed Lycia burning everything it could, certainly was a very destructive beast. However, a more notable rationalization for the Chimera is the aptly named Mount Chimera. To fill in some blanks for you, Lycia is located in modern-day Turkey. In Turkey, there was a town called Olympos, with an O, not a U. Olympos is, of course, named after the nearby Mount Olympos, which is named after Mount Olympus. On Mount Olympos is a place that is called both Burning Rock and Mount Chimera, which is a place on the mountain where methane gas escapes into the air and burns. This is actually a tourist attraction now, so you can go to Mount Chimera after dark and, I don't know, roast up some hot dogs or something. This is likely the birthplace of the entire myth. A mountain that's been burning for thousands of years is already a pretty enticing story to tell, made even cooler when elevated to an allegorical fire-breathing monster. Alright, let's kick off our proper pop culture segment by first talking about more interpretations of the mythological chimera, and then talking about the alchemical ones. Now, I already mentioned how the chimera is treated in Dungeons & Dragons, God of War, Final Fantasy, and Wrath of the Titans, so I won't be repeating the information and we'll be moving on right to some new stuff. First of all, Magic the Gathering has a lot of different chimera variants that are pretty cool, some using the animals we've already familiar with, like the mischievous chimera, and then there are some that are similar blends of other creatures, like Storm Chaser chimera. Coastline chimera might be the closest to the canon one, with wings added, of course. And if you want a chimera as your commander, you can have Nostro, Voice of the Crags, if you want. If you've ever seen Spy X Family, or if you're a based microplastics enjoyer, you might know that Anya, the telepathic little girl of the family, has a stuffed chimera. It's pretty cute, honestly, and it actually has some aspect of all three of the animals that we're looking for, plus the wings that modern chimeras already seem to come packaged with. American Dragon Jake Long is apparently a cartoon I need to watch because, at short glance, it has a lot of really neat monster interpretations. The show's chimera has the three heads we expect, with the major difference being that this time it's bipedal instead of quadrupedal. Power Rangers also has a ton of different takes on the chimera. These are more so chimera by name, again, they're just mixes of different creatures, but there's no way in hell that I'm not going to gas up a creature called Gestalt Hades Beast Chimera, which, if I ever change my name legally, is going to be my new name. The Netflix movie Animal Crackers is about a box of magical animal crackers that turn you into the animal you eat. In what is actually a really cool plot beat, apparently if you eat a handful of the crackers at once, it turns you into a sort of chimera, which happens at the climax of the movie. This is a fun design, but I don't think it has any serpentine aspects, just goat, lion, and dragon. The Percy Jackson and the Olympian series and related books are very well known for incorporating most mythological creatures that you can think of. expect to see them here for most Greek mythology episodes, although I did neglect to mention PJO for Cerberus. That's my bad. The Chimera, however, appears in the first book in the series, The Lightning Thief, as well as the new Disney Plus adaptation of the series. The Chimera is originally disguised as a chihuahua, and it attacks Percy and his friends on the top of the St. Louis Arch under the orders of its mother, Echidna. The Disney Plus version of the Chimera is interesting. It has all the traits that we're looking for. It's a lion that breathes fire, but instead of 3 separate heads, it has goat horns, goat hooves, and a cobra hood around its one lion head. Honestly, that's actually a pretty original take, so I can't be too mad about it. All things considered, that's pretty cool. Rounding out our classical chimeras with the series I'm trying to hit every time, the Scooby-Doo comics again, not the show, have an interpretation of this monster. I'm actually really pleasantly surprised because as far as I'm aware, this is a 100% myth-accurate chimera, which is, as I've mentioned, pretty hard to come by, honestly. So, let's move on to some alchemical-style chimeras now, and the first thing I think of after Fullmetal Alchemist, believe it or not, is actually Pokemon. Pokemon Sun and Moon introduced a new species that is quite literally an alchemical chimera. I don't just mean that it's based on the concept of an alchemical chimera, I mean its lore in-game literally states that the game's evil faction, the Aether Foundation, created Typhon as part of the Beast Killer project. The lore on this is actually really interesting. Apparently, the Aether Foundation created 3 identical versions of this creature, specifically to fit them with a powerful system called the Arceus system. Arceus, by the way, is the god of Pokemon, and I bring this up because Typhon was designed to mimic Arceus' ability to change its elemental type. And if we look at the two, there are some very heavy similarities. However, Typhon went berserk and refused to use the Arceus system without having a helmet fitted on it that suppressed its power, so its name was changed to Type Null. And this is neat, because through the power of friendship, you can get enough trust with your Type Null, take the helmet off, and evolve it into the renamed Silvally. We don't learn what Pokemon are used to create Type Null, but it is absolutely an alchemical creation made in defiance of God and man. Another masterpiece of a game is Mother 3, and the core of this game is also about chimeras. The main villainous faction of Mother 3, the Pigmask Army, makes a whole slew of chimera that are commonly fought as most of the monsters in the game. What's interesting is that there are both biological and mechanical chimeras. The mechanical ones are technically more cyborgs, as they're, mostly just animals with a bunch of weird robotic components attached to them. But a lot of important bosses and characters in this game are chimeras. You actually even get to visit the lab where these chimeras are made in the first place. Very notable is the Ultimate Chimera, which is the only chimera in the game made from more than 2 species of animal, although these animals are never explicitly mentioned. The Ultimate Chimera is so powerful that if you even come into contact with it, it will instantly defeat you, unlike pretty much every other enemy in the game. It's also the creature that if you've played Super Smash Bros., it's the monster on the New Pork City stage, where it can also one-hit kill you. Pretty cool. Another important thing to mention before I stop talking about Mother 3, though, is its logo, which is inspired by the game's use of chimeras as a major plot point. It's a blend of wood and metal, which is physically impossible to fuse together in real life, very similar to the chimera itself. I think it's an absolutely fantastic design choice. They've said this outright, by the way. I highly recommend Mother 3 if you can find a way to play it. Unfortunately, it's pretty inaccessible. Nintendo, get on that shit. Now, there are plenty, and I mean plenty of other types of media that have chimeras in some way, shape, or form. The main issue with finding sources is I'm looking for things that are specifically referred to in-universe as chimeras, and many aggregate lists of chimeras just include weird animal mixes, which, again, even though they're inspired by the classical chimera, have now become their own monsters, their own new designs. That's not a complaint, by the way. Creating new things out of old ideas is a really fun and wonderful way to work. Now, this final segment is technically outside of the scope of this series, but I couldn't go through this episode and not mention it, because there is the concept of the real-life genetic chimera. This is actual real-life stuff. I want to be perfectly clear, I am not making this up. Do not confuse it with the prior segments. I also want to preface that I am a huge science fan and a research enjoyer, but I am not an actual scientist, so I will be doing my best to represent this information both accurately and scientifically. That being said, chimerism, or being a genetic chimera, means that for whatever reason you have two different sets of DNA instead of one. This can happen for multiple reasons. On one hand, you can absorb your twin in the womb.
Fusion is just a cheap tactic to make weak gems stronger.
Or two fertilized eggs can combine together really early on, or there are also weird situations that have been documented where the mother and child siphon and incorporate cells from each other, which I can't even begin to explain. Now, this isn't always noticeable. Very often, chimerism is something that you realistically might not know you have. The symptoms, of course, you would think are obvious, like heterochromia or skin discolorations, but those of course can have other causes as well. Realistically, you would never find this out unless you had some kind of blood work or genetic work done. Chimerism can lead to some pretty interesting things as well, like having two blood types. In even weirder scenarios, it can mean that parents and children aren't genetic matches. Again, there's a lot more information about this topic, but I am not an expert on the matter, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. You can do your own research if you're interested on that. If there are any instances of the chimera that you know about and you particularly like, let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk to you about them. I absolutely can't mention everything, and I love hearing about other people's experiences and favorite versions of this kind of stuff. I am going to make two small changes to the format of this show, by the way. First of all, at the moment, I'm going to be cutting this song segment. It is hard to produce, and it really extends the amount of time it takes to produce an episode. And the other thing is that I am not going to be using the Weird and Wild Creatures ordering system anymore. It was kind of a silly system to begin with, and in all honesty, I'm still going to be using it as inspiration for making this list. However, I want more freedom in choosing my monsters and cultivating my own list, and I want to cover stuff that doesn't show up on the list, and I would rather not wait 100 episodes to do so. I also, really honestly, want to let you guys, the viewers, give me suggestions for what kind of monsters you want to see in the future. It'll be more fun this way. That being said, next episode is already in production. I have already picked a cryptid this time, and it's one of my favorites, but not the one you would think. Next episode will be about the Mongolian deathworm. Thank you so much for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you could drop a like or a comment or a subscription and help support this show. You can feel free to follow me on my socials at MothMancha, although I'm most active on Twitter because I have a chronic addiction to Hellsite, I know. Until next time, thanks for watching, and f*** Yahoo Mail.